Hello again, everyone. My name is Marissa Davis, and founder and principal of Tallawah Consulting, again, where we work with mission-driven brands to help them maximize their impact by using equity, innovation, and inclusion to drive their core strategy forward. As you know, we have had a series of conversations through our Tallawah Talk series where we feature range of individuals, change makers who have been championing work at the intersection of impact and inclusion. This season, our second season, we have been featuring individuals specifically at the intersection of capital and inclusion. And we just thought it would be great to continue this conversation by having another awesome guest with us, Dr. Jackie Copeland with us. And so excited to have you here with us. And really, before we even begin, what we usually do is just give people a sense of who you are. And I want to make sure that folks have a little bit of just a taste of what you've been up to and the work that you've been doing. So first, just to let everyone know, Dr. Jackie Bouvier Copeland, she is a social and environmental justice leader, is founder and president and CEO of the Women Invested to Save Earth, also known as WISE, the WISE Fund, and innovation enterprise, which supports grassroots leaders, but grassroots Black and Indigenous women climate change innovators in Africa, Brazil, Australia, and the US. She's also founder of Black Philanthropy Month. It's a global campaign to document, celebrate, and promote African descent giving, social investment, and venture funding that has reached 17 million people and counting. And she's also an award-winning social change visionary, recognized as a history maker by the US Congress for her innovative civic contributions. And beyond that, her training is in as an anthropologist and an urban designer, and is overall passionate and committed to promoting the wellness and rights of humanity and the planet that we all are here and privileged to share. And so I'm, again, so privileged, it's such a privilege to have you, Dr. Copeland, with us. And I am certainly interested in just hearing more of your perspective, especially within this conversation or this context of leveraging capital in different ways and doing so intentionally and with an eye and ear towards inclusion and equity. So thank you again for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Feel free to just call me Jackie.
All right.
And yeah, looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. All right, Jackie. Well, let us get into it then. So to start us off, when we hear the word capital, that could mean a number of different things. It can be leveraged in a number of different ways, whether it is philanthropy, venture capital, impact investing, even banking, and beyond. Where would you say you fall within this work, and what inspired you to enter this space in the first place?
Well, that's an interesting question and a time. So I've been working professionally for 40 years, 30 years as an executive, mostly in the philanthropy sector, nonprofit organizations, but also as a philanthropic advisor, managing director at a large bank. And a real proponent of community-based philanthropy, because when you step back and look at it objectively, the money we raise in our own communities to support our own movements and our own fight for justice really has been the fuel for any sort of progressive social movement from the beginning of our history in this country till today. And so I have that lens of having worked in institutional philanthropy, but also very grassroots, community-based philanthropy, primarily with Black organizations globally, not just the US, but Africa and its diaspora, but also with women from all over the world. I can't even count the number of countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so after having done that, I came to some point in my career where clearly we've made a lot of progress using our own community philanthropy, and also, although there needs to be more equitable funding, partnering up with allies where we can. But it was also clear to me, if I'm to be fully self-reflective and honest, that this has not been enough. The world is changing faster than we can understand it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The recent, the COVID pandemic and recession being the most obvious example, and very few of us saw that coming. And really, even this COVID period is the result of climate change. Is exacerbated by economic changes in our economic structure and health system that have been in the making for decades. And so it started me thinking, I think maybe about 5 years ago, I had this question in my head. You've been an advocate for giving, and not just money, but the whole culture and mindset of existing to give more to the world than you take from it.
Mm-hmm.
A whole culture and philosophy and lifestyle of giving, because sometimes our culture is based on greed.
On greed, you said?
Greed, mm-hmm. Where the underlying motive is greed is somehow good, mm-hmm. And extracting and exploiting resources, human, animal, environmental, is almost like a human right. And that's a little backwards, because we've seen now what the overexploitation of our planet can do. It can just cannibalize the very markets and resources we depend on for a positive business environment and market. So I had these big questions, and through a variety of work across the world, and I don't know how much storytelling you want me to do, but there was a combination of personal and historical events over the past, I say, year and a half, 2 years, that caused me to create the WISE Fund. Mm-hmm. In 2011, I saw some of these trends, and it was what motivated me to create Black Philanthropy Month in the first place, to make our giving more visible, bolder, stronger, more strategic, so we could address some of our challenges globally and come together across the diversity of the global Black community, including the US. Because when we put all our resources together, we really are a wealthy community, mm-hmm. In terms of time, talent, and treasure. But even with Black Philanthropy Month, I had this experience of going to Australia to work, my first trip there in July 2019, and I got home back to the US, and then it seemed like all of Australia was burning. I think it was probably the largest fire in human history, and then Australians started calling it Black Summer. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about the pollution I grew up with in Philadelphia and how it disproportionately impacts women, communities of color, and poor people, and just had this unsettling feeling that the combination of issues that I was addressing in my advocacy may have been a little off.
Mhm.
that obviously philanthropy alone, in no matter what form, could not address the increasing ferocity, intensity, and frequency of climate change, and as a racial justice and gender justice issue. And we just, in philanthropy, did not, for the most part, seem to be on that wavelength. Climate was here, and all these other social justice issues were someplace else.
Yeah.
There wasn't the intersectional lens that I think is needed to resolve it. And then, about, I guess, 3 months later, first quarter of 2020, I started hearing about COVID. And then it was real. In fact, the first day the WISE Fund was supposed to launch at the UN's Commission on the Status of Women, but the UN had to cancel it. And we launched virtually in mid-March of last year. And within a month, it was clear that African Americans were going to be half of those infected. We ended up, along with Latino people and Native American people, being more than half of all the COVID deaths in the US. Just horrifying, because this brought the statistics into every Black person's living room, actually every American's living room, every person's living room on the planet, but just contemplating a lot what it meant for our community, and how the recession, where by some estimates, we have at least a 30% unemployment rate.
Mhm.
And by next month, 60% of our small and medium-sized businesses will have closed because of the COVID recession. Then you add on top of that, the very public lynchings. We all know the names: George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And I think for me anyway, I would hope every Black person who's been trying to make the world better as a career, that you just do a lot of soul searching. When you're having your own, these issues affect your family and you personally. But I just asked myself the question, what do we need to do differently? And part of that answer for me was creating the WISE Fund.
Yeah.
Women Invested to Save Earth. And Black Philanthropy Month moved beyond philanthropy to look at also social investment, venture investment as well.
So I actually have a follow-up question with that. I mean, even just with the foundation that you've laid around just the intersectional nature of the issues that you're trying to address, and realizing that, or coming to the conclusion that philanthropy wasn't sufficient, like it couldn't just begin and end there.
Mhm.
What does it look like to look beyond philanthropy and leverage capital? I imagine more broadly or holistically in a way that tries to address some of the intersectionality of the issues that you just laid out.
Right. And I can talk about the issues broadly, theoretically,
Yeah.
but we're living in this historical moment where this is where the rubber meets the road, is real. If
Mhm.
we're not careful with just the Black community, our socioeconomic progress post civil rights will be rolled back to like the 1940s, 1950s. I have a palpable sense of alarm about the overall socioeconomic health and wellness of Black people in particular, but everyone right now.
Right.
And so, couple of things. Number one, I'm not saying philanthropy is not relevant or has been ineffective.
Right.
I am saying that at the rate the world is changing
Mhm.
and the disproportionately negative impact of these changes on marginalized communities, there is not enough philanthropy in the world to rebuild Black communities right now,
Mhm.
let alone the countries we reside in. So that is empirical fact number one.
Right.
And so we have to move beyond philanthropy because really the reason we need so much philanthropy, often we give a lot, but we need a lot of support, is because racism and sexism have limited historically our access to private capital, the ability to produce private capital, amass wealth, and the ability to access private capital so that we can actually, I mean, the old term is own the means of production. It was actually illegal for much of American history for us to live in certain areas. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we sometimes have short historical memories.
Yeah.
And people will fill in the blank and say it's because Black people are lazy, they just don't like to work. No, it was illegal to get insured, even to this day. There's redlining that happens. So, one of the things is really just speaking the truth.
Yeah.
Because there's no way to solve our problems if we are just dealing with the niceties and just not facing the good, bad, and ugly
Yeah.
of our experience. And so, with Black Philanthropy Month last year, I convinced my colleagues to do a summit called Black Giving and Beyond.
Okay.
And the Beyond was about how can we engage investors, especially impact investors and venture capitalists, in a conversation about how to pool our respective resources so that we could accelerate and scale the community rebuilding that will need to happen for COVID recovery. And as a result of that conversation, we came up with, and there were 60 countries involved in this, about 1,700 people in the summit conversation in August for Black Philanthropy Month, but 1 million people worldwide in engaging in the conversation and creating these principles and a pledge. And so these principles are important because they come from the global Black community. And these are the ways, regardless of country and ethnicity, we thought collectively that Black philanthropists could empower our giving, and allied communities, especially investors and other funders, could fund our cause in a more effective, just, and sustainable way. Critical because we were still struggling, many of us, from the Great Recession in the mid 2000s, and now you add this on COVID on top of it. And so an increasing trend in philanthropy is to do what I call blended giving.
Okay.
That, everybody knows about program-related investments and mission-related investing. So I think we're in this new phase now where, and increasingly it's being called blended social finance, or sometimes blended giving. And I know back I started actually my professional career in Africa, and this was much more common because the capital markets were at a point where it was just more accepted that philanthropy was in some ways just a drop in the bucket compared to the need. And so we were always talking about, how to create microfinance programs that use philanthropy as maybe soft funding to underwrite the risk of investing in the perceived risk in investing in African markets that were new to many of the financiers, and basically guaranteeing losses so that the private market would come.
Gotcha.
So because I worked on both sides, the whole idea of the WISE Fund is to bring together, I'll say it's like a high-tech global giving and investment circle.
Okay.
Where we're trying to bring together the best of community and allied philanthropy with community and allied investment to increase the pool of financing available to all of the brilliant women of color in the world who have excellent solutions to climate change. And although our communities are overall underfunded, the most underfunded people on the planet are Black, Indigenous, and Latino women. And so that is our primary focus. And I'll just stop there. Happy to share more about the WISE Fund, but this is just an all hands on deck moment for the planet.
Yeah, and even just as you broke down, from this blended giving angle and galvanizing support and partnerships within Black philanthropic spaces beyond allied investors and such. What part of what I am hearing with that is weaving a commitment to inclusion and equity in a meaningful way. So what does that look like specifically when you say you're bringing together these different parties to focus efforts on addressing the environmental realities for Black communities and even beyond? What does it look like to have those partnerships, and how does inclusion kind of fit within that?
Yeah, well, I'll describe what we do. I'm not sure if I'll be getting at your question, but by definition, the WISE Fund is focused on Black, Indigenous, Latino women, particularly grassroots women who have even less access to financing. They're like innovators hidden in plain view. Okay. And so we take resources in the form of grants from foundations, donations from individuals. And we have something that we call the WISE Innovators Program, where we select mostly climate, I'll say environmental innovators with solutions to climate change. Many of them are using good technology, not technology that's exploiting people's privacy and selling it on the open market, but technology that solves the practical problems of women of color living in largely low-income, environmentally stressed communities throughout the planet. And the whole idea of this is if we can get resources, and this has been proven by research over and over again, that women, when they receive a grant or in their nonprofit or an investment in their company, they tend to recycle 90% of those resources in their family and the community. It's a classic, now we call it the women's multiplier effect, that an investment in a woman will actually have a 20 times ripple effect in the broader community. Yeah, so that is key to it. Bringing in, and it can be institutional investors, it can be not investors, but donors, community donors, and we make grants to social enterprises and nonprofits, and we basically the organizations chosen tell us how they want to use the money. And we did our first grant round to 8 organizations, 4 of them nonprofits and 4 of them social enterprises in the US, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Australia. And they were anywhere from 10,000 to 25,000. And I will say in some instances that helped those businesses stay open in the recession. And they, without getting into all the profiles, there's a Kenyan company called Magic Water that has created a machine that can create water from drinkable water in significant supplies. They can create the water from the thin air. They're just amazing organizations that typically don't get attention and funding. And many of them in the US, in Native nations, as well as other climate change impacted communities throughout the US. So that's on one end. And then we have an online giving circle that we call the Wise You community.
The Wise You community, you said? Wise
You community, you as in YOU.
Okay.
Okay, all right. And it's a membership program with a twist. There are 3 membership levels, $100, $500, and $1,000. Anybody can be a member, and we give away 80% of any membership fee we receive to our wise leaders. So that's a relatively new program, but that's also how we are accessing kind of I would say the philanthropy of the planet, to support our innovators. And in return for becoming a member, this platform, which is a partnership with a company called Flourish, provides life coaching to the members. And we're all trying to figure out how to adjust to this new reality and pivot. I was really concerned about everybody's ability to do that. And change agents are under a lot of stress. It's really difficult to keep trying to change the world when your own community, your own household is impacted by the very same challenges you're trying to address. And so the idea with this membership program is that it not only gets resources to WISE funds and our environmental innovators, it also becomes sort of a peer support network and also a way to get high quality, very inclusive, culturally appropriate coaching for our members. And so the other thing we're doing is we're working with our WISE leaders to design a sort of the people's social investment tool. A lot of these social and environmental investment funds require you to have $250,000 to invest to even be in it. And we can all invest in these sort of one-off crowd equity fundraising
Right.
initiatives that are increasingly common, but that's usually just for one company, and it starts and it ends and I think they're great. I'm happy for this new Jobs Act that made this even a possibility. But just like I really believe in community philanthropy, I believe in community investment, and that every person who wants to change the world should have a way to do that without necessarily being wealthy. You can be a person of average means. And so we're trying to figure out how to develop sort of like an all people's social investment tool that would at least give people a better return than they can get in a passbook savings account, which is very important for our community. And I think we can pull it off.
Yeah.
And maybe provide a 3 to 5% return to our investors, which is much better than you can get in your bank account now. Okay, that's less than 1% at this point. And so through these three tools, you can see that we're combining conventional philanthropy,
Right.
individual donations from community or institutions, that we are using technology to create a global giving circle, basically, through the Wise You community that also combines, it's a membership program with a twist.
Yeah.
And now we're in the process of creating this social investment tool. And the idea is that any person who wants to support some of the most promising environmental innovators in the world can choose one or all of these giving or investment mechanisms at the Wise Fund, and be able to make a difference in the US, Africa, or their country or company or organization of choice.
Gotcha.
So that is now one approach to what is increasingly being called blended social finance. Because right now, I mean, we have all these debates about, well, is this philanthropy? And, is this investment? We just need to get as much capital into our communities, into women's hands as possible, so we can rebuild from the economic, psychological, and health trauma of COVID. And COVID is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity because it laid bare the inequities in our communities, in our country, and the world. And we have two choices. We can go back to business as usual, which is totally unsustainable and will make every problem that faced us during COVID worse. Or we can take our lumps, learn our lessons, and try to do better, because there were innovations that came out of COVID that, if supported, could make this world and our communities a lot better off for everybody.
Yeah. And I want to follow up on that thread. I mean, you actually said the word opportunity here. With this multi-layered way of giving, this blended giving model that is a combination of conventional philanthropy and social investing, as you mentioned, and in many ways democratizing
both ends.
investing, yes, on all ends. What kinds of opportunities does that bring about that would otherwise, in your opinion, not be achieved if it were just business as usual, in terms of just using just conventional philanthropy or just impact investing in a different way? What are the opportunities that you see leveraging capital?
Right. Well, for us, I mean, part of it is seeing innovation where people don't expect to see it, because we really don't have, I think one of the unfortunate things that can happen in philanthropy, institutional philanthropy, and institutional investing is that there's a certain type that people assume are the best bets, right?
Right.
That are going to be able to get the work done, follow through on their grant or investment, make money, make impact. But the truth is, talent is evenly distributed across the planet. We have no idea whether the cure for cancer is going to come from a little boy who's living in a village or a rural community in the US or in Africa or Australia that we never heard of. But we do know that if we are not getting everybody access to STEAM education and then resources to bring their ideas to market, as I always say, it's like the world is facing a crisis, but instead of having both hands free to deal with the crisis, we tie one hand behind our backs. Because if you exclude women and people of color, that's more than half the planet that cannot contribute equitably to the solution of what are shared problems. So I believe that the first step in the battle is to see innovation and promise where it actually exists. And I will give you just one example. Native American people have ancient concepts and even technology that, if updated and used today, can help us solve some of our climate change problems. Because I'm a cultural anthropologist, one of the technologies I knew about is called fire stick technology, where indigenous people, not just in the US, not just Native Americans, but around the world, they would deliberately burn the land certain seasons, even create fire lines so that it would almost organically inhibit the spread of wildfires. So now across the world, increasingly mainstream fire department. Well, first, let me back up. That traditional fire stick technology, as called colonialism, took over the world. European colonialism, including the US, was made illegal. It's part of the reason, it's not just climate change, it's part of the reason that in places like California, wildfires that have been uncontrollable, very destructive to health and property, are becoming the norm, with a longer fire season that's about 6-7 months a year now. Totally unprecedented. One of the groups that we're funding is called the Cultural Fire Management Council, led by a group of Yurok people. Yurok people are the largest tribe in California, and a woman named Margot Robbins. And they are working with Cal Fire to teach Cal Fire how to use fire stick technology. And this is part of a global movement because these wildfires are a challenge across the world. One of our other grantee partners is an organization called Pollination Foundation in Australia. And they are creating a global network of Indigenous women fire stick technologists because of genocide and colonialism. Indigenous communities are some of the poorest in the world, but this is now becoming a job opportunity in many Native communities, but women aren't necessarily getting equal access to these new fire stick technology jobs, even though they are keepers of a lot of the technological knowledge about how to do it, when to do it. And one of the great things about reviving this technology is it also regenerates native culture, indigenous culture, foodways, even brings back some plants that are used in traditional cuisine to promote health and wellness. And so most people wouldn't look for innovation there. But in places where fire stick technology is used, there is a documented improvement in wildfire management. And so that's just one example of a grassroots, in this case, ancient innovation that can be applied to help everybody. But often because of racism and sexism to some extent, many of us wouldn't even look there. So those are the types of innovators we're trying to find. Innovators who, if their solutions are supported and scaled, those solutions not only improve the environment, they create economic security and opportunity for women. And the reason we're focused on women is because women are the least funded. And when they are funded, children automatically benefit and the entire community benefits based on the research around the women investment multiplier effect. And so that's just one. We have 8 innovators who we're supporting from that framework, many of them hidden in plain view heroes and heroines. And although we're focused on women, we have one man also doing great work in South Africa that benefits women. And although we're focused on women of color, this is just such an emergency for the planet. I don't know if we always see it that way. You think about what's happening in Texas. Nobody saw that coming, but all the signs have been there for years. You know, half of the Caribbean and the Pacific will be under the ocean, maybe in our lifetime. And so it's really important. We could somehow have perfect social justice, but if the planet that we rely on for life just is toxic, it really would be a very hollow victory. We have to figure out how to do both and.
Right.
The future of our environment and the future of justice are interlinked.
Yeah, so absolutely. And that's I think a powerful way to even end part of our conversation. You know, I just have one, just as you're mentioning and have been talking about just the innovating in plain sight, you know, when are looking at the innovators who are being hidden in plain sight, rather, when it's all said and done and you've leveraged the capital in the way that you ideally envision it being leveraged, you know, what does success look like?
Well, I thought a lot about that because the organizations we're supporting are at different points in their life cycle. Okay. Some are starting up, some have been around for a while, but they couldn't get any attention or consistent funding. And some have been are growing and are multi-million-dollar, but they need more support from, quote, the majority or mainstream capital world. So success for me would be that we attract partners, large capital partners from the social investment and venture investment world and become like a feeder system for them. Mm. It's like, okay, you don't have the capacity to go to reservations or rural communities you never heard of. Wise Fund is there. We know who folks are. Let us work with them, pre-develop them, and then you actually start supporting them because they have ideas and solutions that the planet needs, and nobody can change the world alone. And so stop saying it's a pipeline problem, because it isn't. Here is the pipeline is no longer hidden. It's right in your face.
Right.
So support them. Take a chance on them.
Right.
Like you take a chance on the white male-led organizations and give them millions of dollars often before they've even proven a concept. And so in the next 3 to 5 years, I would love to be able to say that the WISE Fund is a feeder system for the social finance world, social impact and venture in particular, where I will tell you, women of color are getting women in general hardly get any money. They get 1%. Mm-hmm. And then frankly, for African American, Native American, and Latina women, it's so low many studies say it's statistically irrelevant, but we're talking like 0.1%, 0.2%, and 0.3%. It's really pitiful. There's no excuse for it. There's so many talented women. And they're at the absolute front lines of where climate change is having is worse impact.
Right.
Because necessity really is the mother of invention. And their inventions, and many of them have inventions and are trying to apply for patents, but don't even have the money to apply for the patent. They could really save the planet. That's why we're called Women Invested to Save Earth. It's like, see us. Listen, it's not like they've been sitting on their heels. It's just that they're yelling in the wind and no one sees their talent and power. And so that's number one. I want to see, there's always in any entrepreneurial activity, there is a failure rate. But here in Silicon Valley, we say failure is good when applied to men, right? I would love that same sense to be applied to women and people of color. And that the world is in trouble and we just need to test a bunch of different models. Some will make it. We need to fund and test many different models. Right. Some will be impactful and some will make it and some won't. But just because you have a failure of an organization that was led by a woman or a person of color does not mean that entire class of people is inferior or not capable. We don't do that with white men. In fact, as I said, I learned this concept in Silicon Valley, that failure is good. Right. Failure is good for all humanity, not just white male-led businesses. Right. And so that would be a second indicator of success. And obviously a third one, which is sort of a corollary of the first, is that we would see just more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the entire social and environmental movement and ecosystem at a worldwide level. We would no longer be having a conversation about why the large environmental organizations do not have much diversity on their staffs. We would have more equal opportunity for funding of environmental NGOs and enterprises. There would be more equality in patents for women and people of color. I'll just say climate change inventors And we would just understand that given the state that the planet is in, we need to ensure that every person with promising ideas is able to bring them to market. This should be like a career track that every kid has a realistic opportunity of dreaming about and achieving it. Because if we have equality in the innovation ecosystem, we really will save the world.
I think that's the best way for us to end this conversation. I don't think I can say anything better there, Jackie. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing, with this broader audience, the possibility of just prioritizing many communities, largely for you, Black, Brown, and Indigenous women mostly, to be the stalwarts of opportunity and innovation that is often hidden and unrecognized. So I appreciate the work that you do. And for anybody who wants to continue to follow your work, support your work, how can they go about doing that? Where should they go?
Definitely. And I want to emphasize that allies are welcome and needed of all backgrounds, because this is now a planetary issue.
Absolutely.
2 ways. Number one, anybody email me at give@thewisefund.org. give@thewisefund.org. You can also go to our website, thewisefund.org, to learn more about our organization and how you can join the Wise You community. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it talking with you.
Likewise, thank you. And thank you for sharing so many insights and knowledge, for sure. All right, you all heard it. See you next time.
All right, I'm here.